I still remember that night as if it happened just yesterday. The air was cold, the city lights shimmered across the skyline. And if David was sitting quietly in the corner of a grand hall, surrounded by people who barely knew me. It was my son's wife's corporate party, celebration for her law firm's success. Everyone was laughing, clinking glasses, and smiling for photos. I smiled too, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe I just wanted my son to be proud that his old father could still show up, even if he didn't quite belong in a world like theirs. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, was the star of the evening. She looked elegant, confident, and distant. Ever since she married Michael, something had changed between us. Once warm greetings had turned into polite nods. Once family dinners were filled with laughter, now filled with silence. I told myself it was normal. People get busy. Life changes. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just distance. It was something else. Something colder as the evening went on. I could see Sarah introducing Michael to her colleagues, boasting about their new house, their travels, her achievements. I sat quietly, sipping water, when one of her coworkers approached me with a kind smile. "Sir, you must be proud." "Sarah's done a wonderful job here," she said warmly. I smiled. Yes, she's a talented woman. And Michael, well, he's lucky to have her. But before I could finish, Sarah's voice cut through the air like a sharp knife. "Oh, don't mind him," she said, laughing lightly. "Dad's just being polite. He doesn't really understand our world." Few people chuckled politely. I froze, Dad. She never called me that. It was always Mr. David Cold, formal. But the way she said it tonight, it was mocking, dismissive. The coworker looked uncomfortable, smiling awkwardly before walking away. I felt the heat rise to my face. I wanted to leave, but I stayed. Maybe it was pride. Maybe I just wanted to see if my son would say something. Michael was standing beside her, holding his drink, silent. He didn't look at me. I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was nervous. Maybe she didn't mean it that way. But then it happened again. A senior partner of the firm came over to greet her. "Sarah, your presentation this quarter was remarkable. You really led your team well." She smiled proudly. "Thank you, sir. I've worked hard for this." Honestly, not everyone in my family thought I could handle it. Some of them believed my duties should be more traditional. The partner laughed. "Well, you proved them wrong." And then she said it right there in front of her boss, her team, my son. She turned slightly toward me and said, "Some people still live in the past, clinging to old-fashioned pride. My father-in-law here, he means well, but he's a retired man living off his pension. He doesn't really understand what success looks like today." The laughter that followed didn't last long, but it was enough. Enough to pierce through every memory I had of treating her like my own daughter. Michael said nothing. He just stood there, pretending not to hear. I felt something break inside me that night, not anger, not sadness, something quieter. The kind of pain that doesn't shout. It just sits in your chest, heavy and unmoving. I left the hall quietly, pretending I had a phone call to attend. No one noticed me go. Outside, the city lights blurred behind tears I didn't want to admit were there. I walked down the empty street, the sound of laughter echoing behind me like a cruel reminder. That was the night everything changed. The night I stopped being just David, the old man who doesn't understand. And the night I decided silence would no longer be my weakness. The next morning, the world felt different. Not because anything outside had changed, the sun still rose. The birds still sang, but because I had changed. I sat by the window, my old hands wrapped around a cup of coffee gone cold. My thoughts kept replaying Sarah's words from last night. He doesn't really understand what success looks like today. Success? Funny word, isn't it? For her, it was shiny cars, expensive clothes, and a title on a door. For me, success was raising my son to be kind, to respect people, to never forget his roots. And yet, as I sat there, I realized something painful. Maybe I had failed, because my son stood there and said nothing. A son's silence later that day, Michael came to visit. He looked uneasy, holding his phone like it was a shield. "Dad," he began, "Sarah didn't mean it that way." You know how parties are? People joke around. I looked up at him, my voice calm. A joke is something people laugh with, not at. What she did was neither. He sighed, sitting across from me. She's under a lot of stress. Her boss was there and she wanted to make a good impression. Maybe she went too far, but I interrupted softly. She went too far and you let her. Michael's eyes dropped. Silence hung heavy between us. He didn't have to say it. His loyalty was torn. Between his wife and his father. I'm sorry, he whispered, standing to leave. I'll talk to her. But deep down, I knew he wouldn't. Not really. A quiet resolve that evening. I went through an old wooden box I kept in my closet. Inside were yellowed photographs, medals, and certificates. Fragments of a life I'd lived long before Sarah ever entered it. I served my country for 30 years. I'd led men through storms, disasters, and days when hope felt like a rumor. I'd trained leaders who now ran departments, corporations, even ministries. But to Sarah, I was just a retired old man. I smiled, a bitter little smile. She didn't know, not yet, because I had always believed in one thing. Respect isn't demanded, it's revealed. And the world has its own way of showing people who they really are. The invitation 3 days later. An envelope arrived in my mailbox. Gold-trimmed, elegant, the kind that screams importance. Inside, a card read, "You are cordially invited to attend the annual leadership gala hosted by Falcon and Associates law firm, Sarah's firm." I turned the card over. Michael's handwriting was on the back. "Dad, Sarah's boss insisted you come this time, please. It would mean a lot." I paused. Her boss insisted. That was unusual. Maybe this was another attempt to make things right. Maybe Michael had spoken to her boss. Or maybe fate was simply arranging its own stage. Either way, I decided to go. The day arrives when the night came. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the old tie I used to wear during formal inspections. It wasn't expensive, but it carried history. As I entered the grand ballroom, I noticed heads turning. This event was far more formal than the last one. Government officials, CEOs, lawyers, and judges filled the room, and there she was, Sarah, dressed elegantly, smiling as if nothing had ever happened. When she saw me, her smile faltered for just a second. Then she recovered, walking over with Michael by her side. "Oh, you made it," she said, pretending enthusiasm. "I didn't think you'd want to attend something like this." I smiled politely. "You were wrong about a few things, Sarah. This might be one of them." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she quickly turned toward a group of her coworkers. "Come, Dad, let's introduce you to the team again." I could tell she wanted to control the narrative to make me look small again. Harmless. But what she didn't know was that tonight, I wasn't the one under the spotlight. A familiar face, the gala's host, walked onto the stage, a tall, confident man with a deep voice that carried authority. "Good evening, everyone," he said. "I'm honored to welcome you all. Tonight, we celebrate leadership, those who inspire others not just through words, but through actions." And then I saw something that made Sarah's face freeze. Her boss, the same man she had spent years trying to impress, looked directly at me and smiled. He stepped down from the stage, walking toward our table. "David, it's been years," he said warmly, shaking my hand. "You haven't changed at all." The entire table went silent. Sarah blinked in shock. "Wait, you know my father-in-law." Her boss chuckled. "Know him. He was my mentor. Everything I learned about leadership and ethics, I learned from this man." Her smile vanished. Her hands trembled slightly, her confident posture breaking just a bit. I looked at her quietly, not with anger, but with calm understanding. Sometimes silence can be the loudest answer. The whisper before the storm as the evening continued. Her boss made sure everyone knew the story, how I had trained him years ago, how I had once been a decorated leader in a government disaster response unit, how I had shaped dozens of young men into successful professionals, and with every word, I saw Sarah's pride crumble, not because I wanted revenge, but because truth was finally setting things right. But that was just the beginning. Because what happened after that night was something even I didn't expect. That, my friend, was the calm before the storm. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was angry anymore, that had passed, but because couldn't stop thinking about the look on Sarah's face when her boss called me his mentor. Shock, embarrassment, and maybe, just maybe, regret. But pride is a dangerous thing. It doesn't let you admit when you're wrong. The morning after, the next morning, Michael came by again. This time, he looked different, quieter, thoughtful. "Dad," he said softly, "Sarah hasn't said much since the gala. She's been distant." Ah, I smiled faintly. Silence can be humbling, son. Sometimes it teaches us what words can't. He nodded slowly. "Her boss couldn't stop talking about you. He said you trained him years ago when he was just starting out." Sarah was speechless. "Good," I said quietly. "Maybe she'll finally understand that respect isn't about titles, it's about character." Michael hesitated, then added, "She told me she feels embarrassed. I think she realizes what she did." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked out the window. "I'm not looking for an apology, Michael," I said. "I just want her to learn. Because if she keeps treating people like that, one day it won't be me she embarrasses. It'll be herself." Cracks at work weeks passed, and life seemed to return to normal on the surface, at least. But beneath it, things were changing. Sarah began facing problems at work. It started small: missed deadlines, tense meetings, whispers in the hall. Her confidence, once unshakable, started to slip. One evening, Michael called me. "Dad, Sarah's been having a tough time. Her boss has been questioning her attitude. Some of her team members filed complaints." I stayed silent for a moment. "And what do you think, son?" he sighed. "I think she's finally realizing how she's been treating people. Her boss said something about leadership being more than performance. It's about humility. He mentioned your name again. That last line hit me. Not because it made me proud, but because it showed how life has a way of circling back. The lessons we give others often come home when we least expect them to." A chance encounter one afternoon as I was walking home from the market. I heard someone call out, "Mr. David." I turned around. It was Sarah's boss, Thomas. He shook my hand warmly. "It's so good to see you again. I've been meaning to thank you. The way you guided me back then, I still use those lessons every day." I smiled. "You've done well for yourself, Thomas. You built something great." He hesitated for a moment. "Actually, I wanted to ask you something. Do you know what's going on with Sarah? She's been different lately. Defensive, distant from her team." I thought for a second, then said carefully, "She's ambitious, and ambition is good. But sometimes, ambition without humility can burn the very bridges we need to cross." Thomas nodded slowly. "That's exactly what I've been trying to tell her." Then he added quietly, "I'm considering reassigning her to another project. Maybe a smaller one. She's talented, but her attitude has started to affect others." I looked at him calmly. "You do what's fair, Thomas. She'll learn more from fairness than from pity." The breaking point: a few weeks later, I got an unexpected visitor, Sarah herself. She stood at my door, holding a small box. Her eyes looked tired, the confidence gone. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I nodded and led her inside. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt heavy, filled with words neither of us wanted to say first. Finally, she placed the box on the table and said quietly, "They moved me to a smaller department." I looked at her carefully. "I heard." She sat down, her eyes filling with tears. "I've worked so hard, David. I gave everything. But now, it feels like everyone's turning against me. They say I'm arrogant, cold, unapproachable." Her voice cracked. "Maybe they're right." I leaned back, watching her. For the first time, she wasn't the polished, confident lawyer. She was just a person, lost, confused, human. "Sarah," I said gently, "you're not a bad person, but you forgot what it means to be kind. Success can make you forget until something reminds you what really matters." She looked up at me, eyes wet. I hurt you that night, didn't I? I didn't answer. She didn't need me to. The silence said everything. After a moment, she whispered, I'm sorry. Those words, simple as they were, felt like a quiet storm breaking after years of drought. The beginning of change from that day on. Something shifted in Sarah. She began visiting more often, not to impress, not to boast, but to help. She started bringing me groceries, cooking with Michael, asking for advice. At work, people noticed her change. Her boss Thomas told me later, I don't know what happened, but it's like she's a different person now. I just smiled. Maybe she finally understood what leadership really means. But little did I know, there was still one more test waiting for her. A moment that would show whether she had truly changed. Or was just pretending. It's strange how life tests us. Not when we're ready, but when we least expect it. Sarah had been trying to change. I could see it. She smiled more, spoke softer, and for the first time since her marriage, she treated me like family. But change isn't proven by words. It's proven by choices. And her moment came sooner than anyone imagined. An unexpected crisis. It was a rainy Tuesday evening when I got a call from Michael. Dad, he said in a worried tone, Sarah's in trouble. There's been a mistake at her firm, a major one. My heart sank. What happened? She was overseeing a high-profile contract with a government client. Something went wrong, the numbers didn't match, and now there's talk of legal action. Her team says it's her fault. I could hear the panic in his voice. Her boss called her in for an emergency meeting. She's terrified. I hung up, staring out the window at the storm. The city lights blurred behind the rain, and all I could think was, this is it. Life was about to see what kind of person she had truly become. The meeting the next morning. I decided to visit her firm. I didn't tell her. I just walked in quietly, wearing the same old jacket I always wore. The receptionist recognized me and gave a respectful nod. They're in the conference room, sir, she whispered. Through the glass wall, I could see the tension. Thomas, her boss, sat at the head of the table. Sarah stood near the whiteboard, her hands trembling slightly as she held a folder. Several senior partners were present. As I stepped closer, I could hear the voices. Thomas's tone was calm but firm. Sarah, this contract discrepancy is serious. The client is threatening to pull out. Someone in your department altered the data, and it happened under your supervision. Sarah took a breath. Sir, I didn't alter anything. But yes, I should have caught it. It's my responsibility. One of the senior lawyers frowned. We checked the files. It seems your assistant, Laura, made the changes. You were supposed to review them before submission. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. Laura has been working double shifts. She's new and inexperienced. If anyone should be blamed, it's me. I should have guided her better. That silence, heavy, uncomfortable, filled the room. Thomas looked at her carefully. Are you saying you'll take the fall for this? Yes, she said, voice steady. Because that's what a leader does. My chest tightened. For the first time, I saw not arrogance, but courage. Truth revealed after the meeting ended. I waited outside. Sarah walked out, pale but calm. When she saw me, her eyes widened. David, what are you doing here? I came to see what kind of woman my son married, I said softly. And I'm glad I did. She looked confused. You heard everything. I nodded. You stood up for someone who couldn't defend herself. That's rare, Sarah. You've changed. Her eyes filled with tears. It wasn't easy, you know. I used to think leadership was about power, but it's really about responsibility. I smiled faintly. And respect, Sarah. Always respect. The turnaround day, few days later, something unexpected happened. Thomas called me again. David, I thought you'd like to know Sarah's team rallied behind her. They came forward and proved she wasn't at fault. It was an honest mistake, and she took the blame anyway. The client respected that. They're staying with us. I chuckled softly. I'm not surprised, Thomas. People follow honesty, not authority. He laughed. You taught me that years ago, and now it seems your daughter-in-law is learning it too. For the first time in a long time, I felt something I hadn't felt toward Sarah. Pride. The conversation that changed everything that evening. Sarah came home early. She found me in the garden watering the plants. "I thought I'd never earn your respect again," she said quietly. I set the watering can down. "You never lost it, Sarah. You just forgot what it meant." She sat beside me on the bench. "When I first married Michael, I thought I had to prove myself to everyone. I wanted to show I wasn't just a daughter-in-law. I wanted to be someone important." I looked at her gently. "And you are. But importance doesn't come from what people think of you. It comes from what you do when no one's watching." She smiled faintly. "You sound like my boss." I laughed softly. "Your boss sounds like me." A subtle apology. There are apologies made in words, and there are those made in actions. The next weekend, Sarah surprised me with something simple but meaningful. She organized a small dinner at home. No guests, no coworkers, no fancy decorations. Just family. Halfway through the meal, she stood up and raised her glass. "I want to thank someone tonight," she said, looking at me. "Someone who taught me that real success isn't about status, it's about strength, patience, and kindness. David, you've given me more wisdom in silence than I could have found in any book." Everyone clapped softly. Michael smiled proudly. And for the It's strange how life comes full circle. One day, you're the one being laughed at, and later, without even trying, you become the quiet lesson that humbles everyone else. It had been almost a year since that fateful night when Sarah humiliated me at her firm's party. Since then, so much had changed. She had changed. But fate wasn't done with us yet. The announcement one afternoon, Michael walked into my study holding a printed email. "Dad," he said, his voice carrying a mix of surprise and excitement. "Sarah's firm is hosting their annual gala again. And guess what? They're honoring her this time." I raised an eyebrow. "Honoring her?" He grinned. "Yeah, she's receiving the leadership award for rebuilding trust in her department and improving the firm's ethics culture. Thomas personally nominated her." I couldn't help but smile. Leadership award. Sounds like she's finally earned it. Michael nodded. "She wants you there. She said this time she doesn't want to stand on that stage without you sitting in the front row." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened. I remembered the last gala, the laughter, the shame, the silence, and now she wanted me there. "Tell her I'll be there," I said finally. The return to the ballroom the night of the gala arrived. The hall was the same, golden chandeliers, music, and the same polished crowd. But everything felt different. As I walked in, people nodded politely. Some even recognized me from last year. But this time, their eyes carried respect, not amusement. Sarah greeted me at the entrance. "David," she said softly, "thank you for coming." She looked beautiful, not just in the way she dressed, but in the way she carried herself. Graceful, calm, grounded. "You've come a long way, Sarah," I said. She smiled faintly, only because I had someone who showed me what real strength looks like. The speech, when her name was announced, the room erupted in applause. She walked onto the stage, composed but emotional. Thomas, her boss, handed her the plaque and stepped aside. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "before Sarah gives her speech, I want to say something. A year ago, she stood in this same room, a rising star with ambition. Today, she stands here not just as a leader, but as a person of integrity and humility. And that change began with someone very special." He turned toward me and smiled. My heart skipped a beat. All eyes turned in my direction. Sarah took the microphone, her voice trembling slightly. "Last year, at this very event, I made a mistake. One I'll never forget. I let pride blind me. I hurt someone who deserved nothing but respect. And that night changed me. You could hear a pin drop. I once called my father-in-law old-fashioned. I laughed at his simplicity. But what I didn't see was his strength, the kind that doesn't come from wealth or fame, but from experience and kindness." She paused, her voice breaking. When I fell, he didn't throw my mistakes back at me. He stood by me quietly, letting life teach me its lessons. Tonight, if I stand here being honored, it's because he showed me what leadership truly means: forgiveness, patience, and courage. There were tears in her eyes now, and for the first time, there were tears in mine too. The audience began to clap, not politely this time, but with genuine warmth. Some even stood up. Thomas smiled. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in honoring Mr. David, a man who taught us all that real leaders never stop leading, no matter their age. It's the moment of truth as the applause filled the hall. Sarah stepped down from the stage and walked straight toward me. Without hesitation, she bent slightly and said, "Dad, thank you for not giving up on me when I least deserved your respect." I placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "You earned it back, Sarah, not with words, but with change." She smiled through her tears. I'll never forget that. After the lights later that night, when the crowd had thinned and the music softened, Thomas joined me near the exit. He said quietly, "You know, David, not many people can change someone's heart without saying a word. You did that?" I smiled faintly. Sometimes silence teaches louder than speeches. He nodded. That's something I'll remember for the rest of my life. Reflection as I walked outside. The cool night breeze brushed against my face. The city glowed, peaceful, distant, alive. I thought about everything that had happened. The humiliation, the pain, the long silence, and the final redemption. Revenge had never been my goal. Justice didn't come from anger. It came from patience, from letting time reveal truth. And time had done exactly that. Sarah had found her way. And I had found peace. Sometimes. The sweetest revenge isn't about making others suffer. It's about living long enough to see them become better than they were. It's strange how life comes full circle. One day, you're the one being laughed at, and later, without even trying, you become the quiet lesson that humbles everyone else. It had been almost a year since that fateful night when Sarah humiliated me at her firm's party. Since then, so much had changed. She had changed, but fate wasn't done with us yet. The announcement one afternoon, Michael walked into my study, holding a printed email. "Dad," he said, his voice carrying a mix of surprise and excitement, "Sarah's firm is hosting their annual gala again. And guess what? They're honoring her this time." I raised an eyebrow. "Honoring her?" He grinned. "Yeah. She's receiving the Leadership Award for rebuilding trust in her department and improving the firm's ethics culture. Thomas personally nominated her." I couldn't help but smile. Leadership Award. Sounds like she's finally earned it. Michael nodded. "She wants you there. She said this time she doesn't want to stand on that stage without you sitting in the front row." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened. I remembered the last gala. The laughter, the shame, the silence, and now. She wanted me there. "Tell her I'll be there," I said finally. The return to the ballroom the night of the gala arrived. The hall was the same: golden chandeliers, music, and the same polished crowd. But everything felt different. As I walked in, people nodded politely. Some even recognized me from last year. But this time, their eyes carried respect, not amusement. Sarah greeted me at the entrance. "David," she said softly, "thank you for coming." She looked beautiful, not just in the way she dressed, but in the way she carried herself. Graceful, calm, grounded. "You've come a long way, Sarah," I said. She smiled faintly. "Only because I had someone who showed me what real strength looks like." The speech, when her name was announced, the room erupted in applause. She walked onto the stage, composed but emotional. Thomas, her boss, handed her the plaque and stepped aside. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said before Sarah gives her speech, "I want to say something. A year ago, she stood in this same room, a rising star with ambition. Today, she stands here not just as a leader, but as a person of integrity and humility. And that change began with someone very special." He turned toward me and smiled. My heart skipped a beat. All eyes turned in my direction. Sarah took the microphone, her voice trembling slightly. Last year, at this very event, I made a mistake. One I'll never forget. I let pride blind me. I hurt someone who deserved nothing but respect. And that night changed me. You could hear a pin drop. I once called my father-in-law old-fashioned. I laughed at his simplicity. But what I didn't see was his strength, the kind that doesn't come from wealth or fame, but from experience and kindness. She paused, her voice breaking. When I fell, he didn't throw my mistakes back at me. He stood by me quietly, letting life teach me its lessons. Tonight, if I stand here being honored, it's because he showed me what leadership truly means: forgiveness, patience, and courage. There were tears in her eyes now, and for the first time, there were tears in mine too. The audience began to clap, not politely this time, but with genuine warmth. Some even stood up. Thomas smiled. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in honoring Mr. David, a man who taught us all that real leaders never stop leading, no matter their age. The moment of truth as the applause filled the hall. Sarah stepped down from the stage and walked straight toward me. Without hesitation, she bent slightly and said, "Dad, thank you for not giving up on me when I least deserved your respect." I placed a hand on her shoulder and whispered, "You earned it back, Sarah. Not with words, but with change." She smiled through her tears. I'll never forget that. After the lights later that night, when the crowd had thinned and the music softened, Thomas joined me near the exit. He said quietly, "You know, David, not many people can change someone's heart without saying a word. You did that." I smiled faintly. Sometimes silence teaches louder than speeches. T nodded. That's something I'll remember for the rest of my life. Reflection as I walked outside. The cool night breeze brushed against my face. The city glowed peaceful, distant, alive. I thought about everything that had happened. The humiliation, the pain, the long silence, and the final redemption. Revenge had never been my goal. Justice didn't come from anger. It came from patience, from letting time reveal truth. And time had done exactly that. Sarah had found her way. And I had found peace. Sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't about making others suffer. It's about living long enough to see them become better than they were. The morning after the gala, I woke up earlier than usual. Sunlight was spilling gently through the curtains. The house was peaceful, no noise, no rush. For the first time in a long while, I felt complete. I made myself a cup of tea and stepped out onto the porch. The garden I had planted years ago had finally bloomed again. New leaves, new colors, just like life. As I stood there, I thought about everything that had happened in the past 2 years, how humiliation turned into forgiveness, and bitterness into growth. Sarah came outside quietly. She stood beside me holding her own cup of tea. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" she said. "It is," I replied softly. "Feels different now." She nodded. "It does. I guess peace feels strange when you've lived with guilt for too long." I smiled gently. "Guilt fades when you learn from it, Sarah. That's the difference between regret and redemption." She looked down, thoughtful. "You know, I always thought success was about being seen, about being praised. But now I realize it's about being respected and respecting yourself first." "That's true," I said, staring into the horizon. "Respect doesn't come from titles or trophies. It comes from how you treat people when no one's watching." Life's full circle eyes, days turned into weeks. I noticed small changes around me. Sarah and Michael began visiting more often. They started having dinner at my place every Sunday, laughing, sharing stories, sometimes even arguing playfully like family again. Sarah would often ask for my advice about her projects. And every time she did, I saw something in her eyes that had once been missing: humility. One Sunday evening, as we sat together after dinner, Michael said, "Dad, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time we do something in your honor. You've been teaching us lessons quietly all along. Maybe we should share them." I chuckled. "What kind of lessons?" He smiled. "The kind that never make it into books, but should." Sarah nodded. "Like patience, dignity, grace. I leaned back and said, if my life ever teaches anyone anything, I hope it's this, that revenge doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes it means letting time reveal who was right all along. They both sat silently, taking it in. Voiceover reflection, cinematic close scene fades too slow. Emotional music, visual of David sitting peacefully under sunlight. I once believed that silence made me invisible, that if I didn't fight back, I'd lose. But now I understand silence is where strength gathers its power. When people insult you, don't rush to prove them wrong. Just keep walking your path. Let time be your loudest answer, because time, oh, time never lies. It exposes pride, it heals wounds, and it rewards patience. If you ever feel humiliated, betrayed, or forgotten, remember, life has a way of bringing truth back to the surface. You just need to stay calm long enough to see it happen. Soft pause. Emotional background swell. Sarah once called me a burden today. She calls me dad, not because I changed her, but because life did. I just waited long enough to see it. So if you ever feel wronged, don't seek revenge in anger. Seek peace in dignity. Because revenge fades, but respect, once earned, echoes forever. Closing scene. Sarah and Michael leave that night. As their car disappears down the road, David turns off the porch light and looks at the stars. He whispers quietly to himself, the best revenge is living with grace. The camera slowly pans upward, the night sky glowing with quiet peace. Soft piano music fades out.